Alright, so I let Caroline go first when it comes to her first camping gear, because a lot of the camping gear that I started out with needed a lot of improvement before I knew she would enjoy herself. And so I want to show you what I kind of started with. I don't have a lot of the gear that I originally started camping with, because when I first started camping, I was real little. I was with my parents, and my parents, we didn't have a lot of money, and so instead of going on vacations, we would go to like these resorts, and so we would sleep in a tent, and I would sleep on the ground. But there was an arcade and swimming pools and a breakfast lounge, and it was more of a resort than it was like your traditional camping. And so yes, we did sleeping in a tent, but it wasn't a real outdoor experience, I guess. And then as I got older, that's when I got my own tent and started doing my own thing, and camping turned into the resort thing to just kind of partying with my friends. And so a lot of the gear that I started with didn't make it through the party, I guess you'd say. But the thing that had always been with me was this tent. Now this is a very inexpensive Ozark Trail tent that I got a long time ago. It's an 8x8 dome tent. And this thing, I've had it for a very long time. I've slept in it many of nights. And the thing about this tent is, if you do not seam seal it after every single use, if you're going to use this thing and you do not seam seal it and it rains, it's going to leak and you're going to get soaking wet. And even if you do seam seal it, the condensation that builds up inside this thing is just ridiculous. You still might end up soaking wet if you don't leave the windows open and ventilate it. You're going to be soaking in the morning. This thing condensates so bad. It leaks if you don't seam seal it, and it's a lot of work to keep this tent a functional tent. And so that's why I upgraded it immediately. I didn't want Caroline to experience that. I just did a budget camping trip not that long ago, and I bought a $50 Coleman tent, and that $50 tent blows this thing out of the water. Like, that thing was so much nicer than this. So technology has come a long way since I got this thing. But this thing has served me well for a really long time. And yeah, it's what got me started. It's what got me out there practicing and doing things. And so I still have my original tent. I still like to set it up sometimes and kind of deal with the nuisance, just so that I can appreciate the newer tents that I have. Because this thing is a pain. It's a pain to set up. It's a pain to sleep in because of the condensation. It's not my favorite tent in the world, but it brings back so many memories that I can't get rid of it. And then the other thing is, Caroline showed you the inflatable mattress that we used to have, that we still have. I used to have one, but it was just a single person. And then this right here is what allowed me to hang out with the cool kids, because everybody else had one of those little tiny hand pumps, and then just those little cylinders. And I always had a big pump, so I could inflate my bed way faster than they could, and everybody was always borrowing this. I don't think this is my original one, but it was the same size as this, and I upgraded to this one, and this one actually inflates on the push and the pull. And so not only is it bigger and can inflate things faster, but because it inflates on the push and pull, it was even faster yet. And so this thing has been borrowed by lots and lots of people. And then as I was out, if we were out on the lake, we were always out on the lake, but I would put it in the water because it sucks in the air from here. So if you put it in the water, it sucks in water, and I would use it as a hose and spray people. And so this thing has seen a lot of abuse, but it still works really well. I don't really use it anymore, but yeah, it's a really good pump. And like I said, everybody would borrow it all the time because everybody else had those little tiny things, and I always carried a big pump. Another thing that I had was this. This is a lantern. It takes 4D batteries, so when there's batteries in here, this thing weighs a ton. It has a handle, so you can carry it different ways, and then the handle has a little kickstand, a little wire that comes out, so you can set it on a table or set it on the ground and adjust it. And yeah, this thing weighs a ton, but it was small and compact, and then it worked really well. It got the job done, but like I said, it weighed a ton. So yeah, that was my light. We'll save that for last. And so then next would be my cook kit, and this is a Boy Scout cook kit, and it still has the made in China stickers on it, because honestly I never cooked anything. And if I did cook, it was hot dogs over the fire. Yeah, made in China. The sticker's still on it. The pan still has the made in China sticker on it. And yeah, I never cooked anything on here. As you can see, this thing is still brand new looking. The pan still pretty new looking. The one thing that I did use all the time was the bowl. This little plate, you can see it's dinged up and it's bent out of shape, because I would roast marshmallows or I would roast hot dogs and I'd put them in the bowl. Or if somebody brought a chili or a hot dish or something to share with everybody, I'd have them put it in my bowl. And so this, I would always carry the whole entire thing, but this was the only thing I used, and I never cooked anything. I always, like I said, I would roast hot dogs. That was the most intense cooking I would do when I was younger. And yeah, people would share their food with me sometimes, and I would use the plate. And that was the extent of my cooking. I always brought like chips and crackers and things that didn't need to be cooked, because when you're out having fun with your friends, last thing you want to do is kind of stop and cook and eat. So I never really cooked much when I was younger. And then keeping with that fast pace, I would have a Coleman cooler, one of those really cheap big coolers. And so I worked at a restaurant. My first job was working at a restaurant, and they have the big industrial ice machines. And so I would go and I would fill up buckets of ice there, and then I'd pour them in my cooler, and then I would have Mountain Dew in there, and then I would get one of those little plastic tubs, you know, that are like, they used to be like 99 cents, and they'd make a gallon of pink lemonade, that Country Time pink lemonade. And then I would fill up mason jars. And so I always had little mason jars and big mason jars. And the little mason jars were for the daytime use, and then the big mason jars were mixed a little differently, and they were for nighttime use only. So I had those, and all of that time using mason jars, I never had one break. And I would let other people use them. The issue that I ran into was people would take them all the time. People were always stealing my mason jars, and even though I was making really cheap lemonade, it got real expensive replacing the mason jars all the time. So I ended up quit carrying these, but it's so handy when you're out camping and you're in the hot sun all day and you're running around with all your friends to just open this up and have a nice cold pink lemonade. I really enjoyed it, but like I said, people kept stealing my jars, so I don't do that anymore. But now that I'm kind of away from that crowd of people, I've kind of grown up a little bit, I might start again, because like I said, it's nice to just have a pre-mixed drink that you can just pull out of the cooler, start drinking. So that might be a tradition that I bring back. And then the last thing that I own, like I said, my sleeping pad was an air mattress, a single person air mattress, one of those green Coleman. My sleeping bag was one of those flannel on the inside, green on the outside, probably Coleman. Sleeping bags, the rectangle ones that everybody had when they were a kid. I had that for a real long time. And I didn't bring much with. You know, the purpose was to party and have fun. It wasn't really to rough it and to, you know, practice outdoor skills. The goal was to eat, drink, and be merry, and that's what we did. Probably a little too much, but the last thing I want to show you is something that I actually am really proud of, and that's my knife. And so this little Buck 309 here is one of my first, this is the first knife I ever got. And this knife right here my dad gave to me when I was real little, and I cut myself all the time because it's just a slip lock, and so it would close and cut my fingers all the time from it closing on my fingers. But I kept using it, and I kept taking care of it, and because I took care of it so well, my dad ended up buying me this Buck 110. So this thing is really old, and this locks. It locks open, which I really liked. And this was my knife for a long time. I still like using my Buck, but I was so nervous of losing it or somebody taking it or something happening to it that I never carried it on my belt. I would keep it in my tent. So I'd go to my tent, I'd grab it, I'd use it, I'd put it away and put it back in my tent. So I was constantly running back and forth from my tent to whatever I was working on I needed a knife for, whether we were cooking up meat or if we were making marshmallow sticks or hot dog sticks or whatever it was. I was constantly going back and forth from my tent because I was so scared of wrecking this thing. And it's held up really well. I've taken care of it. And yeah, that's something that I plan to keep with me forever and ever. It's my favorite knife, and it's because my dad gave it to me. And that's pretty much my gear. Everything that's left anyway. Like I said, I didn't really go out and camp like traditional. Like we would have big fires, but we would start them with gasoline. We would have somebody bring firewood. You know, they would have the wood from their dad's fireplace or whatever. And yeah, so it wasn't until later in life that I actually started prepping and getting out and practicing outdoor skills. And yeah, I'm really glad I did, because these are all skills that 100 years ago, if you had the skill set to cook on an open fire and to set up a tent and do all these things, you could do all of that today exactly the same. And 100 years from now, you can still cook on a fire and do all the same things. And so these are all skills that are pretty much non-perishable. They'll be exactly the same today as they were 1,000 years ago, and they'll be exactly the same as they're gonna be 1,000 years from now. And so I'm really glad that I got into the woodcraft part of it, the starting fire with birch bark and all that bushcrafty stuff that you call it today. I'm really glad that I got started in it, and I plan to keep advancing in those skills as the channel grows. And so with that being said, make sure to subscribe and come join the pack. I have a new video every Sunday and Thursday, and hopefully I can do a trip where I bring back all this old gear and just kind of have fun like I used to do in my younger years. So thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.